member of the Fire Brigades Union, so when the industrial action bit comes up, can somebody remind me and log me out, or I can log out this end.
That's fine, thanks Rob. That'll be coming up in part 2 of the meeting. Is there anybody else who has a declaration of interest? I can't see any virtual hands being raised, so I take it that's a negative. So going on to item 3, notice of urgent matters. I haven't received any notice of urgent matters, so there's nothing under item number 3. And then item number 4, minutes of the last meeting held on the 17th of October 2022. So we'll take those for accuracy to begin with. So starting on page number 1, is there anything that anybody feels is inaccurate on page number 1? Going on to page number 2, then page number 3, then page number 4, then page number 5, then page number 6, and then finally page number 7. Is anybody prepared to propose that we accept the accuracy of the minutes of the last meeting, please? Diolch yn fawr, Councillor Gwynfor Owen. Diolch yn fawr, Councillor Mark Jones. Will you show that you approve the minutes of the last meeting, please? That's unanimous. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much. So going on to matters arising. I can't myself see anything specific under matters arising from the last meeting, but I'll throw it open to see if anybody has anything that they feel need to be raised from the last meeting. I can't see any hands raised, so there's no matters arising. So we'll go on to item number 6, which is the Chair's report. You'll see that both myself and the Deputy Chair have been quite busy over the last few months with various meetings and events. I've got to say that I really enjoyed going around visiting the stations on Christmas Day at Carnarvon, Bangor and Holyhead. We received a really warm welcome from the crews that were on duty at the time, and really enjoyed the interaction with the watchers at those different stations. One thing that isn't in the report, because it's only just happened, but you will be aware of, is the fact that the Chief and myself and Assistant Chief Officer Helen MacArthur and also the Treasurer met with local authority leaders and chief executives last Friday morning to discuss next year's budget. So that happened last Friday. Deputy Chair, do you want to come in? Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I apologise. I was supposed to go to Deeside Fire Station on Christmas Day, but unfortunately I was unwell, and I did send my apologies. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions or comments that anybody wants to make in relation to the Chair's report?
Chair, if I could, I just want to thank yourself and Paul for the extensive work that you've done with the North Wales authority leaders. It's been a considerable workload for you, I'm sure, and I just want to thank you for all your efforts.
Well, thank you, Nigel, much appreciated. I can't see any other hands being raised, so thank you. We'll move on to, I'm going to take the next item because we're all eager to discuss it, I know, and try and approve it. We're going to deal with item number 8 next, which is the medium-term financial strategy 2023-26 and the budget for 2023 and 24, because I think the other finance-related reports today will link on after we discuss this item. So I'm going to hand over to Assistant Chief Fire Officer Helen MacArthur to present the item. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. If you could just bear with me a moment whilst I find my mouse. There we are. Thank you. This is agenda item 8, and it's the first of the 3 financial reports today. This report relates to the revenue and capital budgets for the financial year 2023-24, but also the medium-term financial strategy for the period April 23 through to March 2026. Financial planning within the public sector at the moment is very challenging, and the report sets out the risks and uncertainties that we're experiencing. Most of these will resonate from the work being undertaken within your own councils, and the report today attempts to provide the context for ourselves as the Fire and Rescue Authority. In that respect, this report builds on previous reports brought before you and these included the planning framework document that was considered at the meeting in October. This was a high-level document which set out the service delivery model and confirmed that that remained the same and remained unchanged, and also outlined the planning assumptions, risks and uncertainties that we were facing. The original budget assessment document was brought before the Audit Committee and the Executive Panel in December. This confirmed the original assessment of a budget of 44.71 million, which is a year-on-year increase of 13.5%. The report set out the challenges being faced and specifically referenced the pay awards, interest rate increases and energy hikes. Whilst this was noted, it was concluded by yourselves that it was unaffordable. And notably at that time also, the Welsh Government settlement hadn't been announced. Since that time, further work has been undertaken, which has included a member planning meeting held on the 3rd of January, internal meetings to consider further options for reducing the 2023-24 budget. At the same time, it's been disappointing to note that the Welsh Government has removed financial support for the Emergency Service Network. This was received by way of grant funding and amounted to £400,000. The Emergency Service Network is a critical function for us, and this cost has had to be absorbed into our core expenditure. Today's report brings together the outcomes of these meetings and also the internal work undertaken to absorb the grant reduction, and also the work that we've undertaken to look at the ways of reducing costs. In broad terms, there are two further options contained within the paper for your consideration, and I would refer yourselves to paragraph 15 of the report. Within paragraph 15, the table sets out the first budget assessment of 44.71 million, which members have confirmed is not affordable. The second option reduces the year-on-year increase to 11.8%, and this includes using £500,000 of reserves and reducing the pay assumption for 2023-24 to 4%. It also confirms that internal savings would also need to be made through stringent management of vacancies and costs. The third option contained within the report for your consideration caps the year-on-year increase at 9.9%. And this has been achieved through using £500,000 of reserves, reducing the pay assumptions, but also making internal savings of £800,000 over and above those included within option 2. I would refer members to paragraphs 21 through to 23 of the report, which confirms the actions necessary to achieve this reduction. The table provided also provides more information, and by way of summary, it includes extending the response standard to 35 minutes, which would reduce the minimum pumps available to 18 from the existing 20. A reduction in the number of home safety checks, reducing it from 20,000 to 17,500 approximately, but again, ensuring that the focus is on the vulnerable in our communities. Deferring the purchase of the wildfire protective equipment for our firefighters that we would have used on mountain fires, such as those experienced during summers of 2018 and 22. And whilst continuing to recruit to retain stations to maintain availability, this will be limited, the year-on-year increase will be limited to maintain the costs. Members will also recognise from previous meetings and the report that one of the key risks and uncertainties relates to our pay, and notably the pay award for firefighters has not yet been agreed for 2022-23. As pay awards for the current year are expected to be above the 2% initial planning assumption, there is a deficit that we've had to bring forward from 22-23. This is being met from reserves in this year, but it's not sustainable, and therefore this has contributed to the increase in 2023-4. This is relevant also as to achieve the 9.9% increase, it has been necessary to significantly reduce the pay expenditure outlined within the original planning assessment. Notwithstanding these measures, there are significant residual risks, including that planning assessment, that the pay award for 2023-24 will be 4%. And at the moment, this is just an unknown factor. Reducing the budget below that figure of 43.31 million caps the expenditure at 9.9%, but reduce it further would require permanent structural changes. These would need to be robustly evidenced and subject to appropriate consultation. We're currently working through a fire cover review to support this, and the initial findings will be presented to yourselves as members in April 2023. I'd like to highlight Appendix 4, which provides you with the levy for each local authority, and this contains the options set out within this paper. And finally, Appendix 5 also provides a full reconciliation between option 1, which was an increase of 13.5%, through to option 3, which is the increase of 9.9%. Turning to the capital programme, proposal is for capital expenditure of 6.5 million, excluding schemes that it will be necessary to bring forward from this financial year. These costs include 600,000 in relation to the first phase of the command and control system, and this is the system that enables us to mobilise our pumps. It includes 1.4 million for the replacement of fire appliances, and 200,000 for multi-purpose vans. And these vehicles are ones that we would use in relation to our wider activities, including business fire safety, training, and also our home safety teams. Members will note that we've included a cost of £150,000 for a welfare unit at wildfires. Our experiences this year meant that very often crews were on the mountain for a significant and prolonged period of time, and it's necessary to ensure that we have facilities available. Included also is £250,000 for training tower replacements, and we have a programme of replacing two training towers each year. Members will also know that there is provision for a land purchase, but please note that this is subject to further reports and further approval. So contained within the budget is for a provision only. Although I do recognise that this has been an extremely difficult budget setting process for the reasons that we've discussed today, I hope that the report provides members with an understanding of the financial challenges and the risks contained within the options presented. I'm happy to take any questions and discuss the report.
Thank you very much, Helen. Before I throw it out to members for discussion and comments and questions, I'm conscious of the fact that there's a number of new members to the authority who haven't been involved in the budget setting process previously. So I'm just going to invite our clerk, Gareth Owens, just to remind us of our role and responsibility in relation to that. Thank you, Gareth.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Bore da pawb, bore da. As ACFO MacArthur has already said, this is a particularly difficult budget round this year. All public services are under pressure to limit rises in taxation. And it's fair to say, I think, that your role is perhaps doubly difficult as members of the FRA. Not only must you consider how to do that, but you must do so in the context of what is in the best interests of the FRA only. Whilst you are all members of a constituent council, you need to put the possible impact on your home authority and your home ward out of your mind. Now, you have, of course, a duty to consider the impact on taxpayers, what we call our fiduciary duty, which all members of public service, whether they be elected or employed, share. But you have to consider that in the context only of your role on the FRA. As FRA members, you are the fire authority. You are subject to statutory responsibility to provide emergency response and preventative services. and you must do so in a way that is consistent and comprehensive for the whole region, not just part of it that you represent on your constituent council. You must do it for the whole region, and we must do so in a way that is safe for employees as well. I know, although I wasn't able to join you for the workshop, I know that there were various discussions about what might be included, what might be taken out, and I understand, and I've seen from the report, and I've heard from the chief about the outcome from that meeting. I'm sure that as members, you will come to a conclusion that is in the, as I say, the interests of the fire authority, and you will need to, if anybody though needs any help or needs any assistance with how they do that, or with how they might handle some of the consequences of the decision back at the constituent council, then there are ways of dealing with that we can help you with if as a new member you're struggling with how you try and balance those responsibilities, or how you put out of your mind what's going on back at your constituent council, and how you focus simply on the provision of fire services across the whole of North Wales. Again, as I say, Chair, happy to help with that if members require it, but otherwise I don't think I have anything more that I need to say.
Thank you very much, Gareth, for clarifying that. So I'm going to throw it open now for comments and questions to members. Thank you. Councillor Nigel Smith. Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question really for Helen. She mentioned a significant land purchase, and I just wondered whether she could expand on that and the necessity going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. The land purchase relates to our training centre. Currently, we have what's known as a hot smoke house, and that's reached its end of life. So all of our expenditure at the moment is about maintaining it, but not developing it. So therefore, moving forward, we know that we need to make additional provision for our training, and we're in the very early stages of that. Within that, we have identified a piece of land. It's very much in the early stages. It's not become before members in terms of approval at the present time. So that is there purely for completeness. So in recognising that, members aren't approving that spend, but they're acknowledging that they will receive a report during the forthcoming financial year. That report will highlight more information in terms of where the land is, the ultimate costs, and the proposals for developing of that land.
Thank you, Helen.
Councillor Chrissy G. Chrissy?
Yeah, hiya. Please bear with me as a new councillor. You probably covered this many times. Why did the Welsh Government remove the £400,000? If you could just remind me about that.
Of course, yes. We do receive about £2.3 million worth of support from the Welsh Government. And part of that included a grant for what's known as the Emergency Service Network. Sometimes it's also, you might hear it referred to as Airwave. And what this is it's a national network which enables fire services to communicate both on the fire ground, also back through to control. But it also enables us to talk with other emergency services, be it Welsh Ambulance Service, or indeed the police. Because it's a national network, there is a programme to replace it. This was initially it was hoped that it would be replaced probably by now, but it's one of those things that's become more complex and it's been pushed back, which means because it's national, it means that we haven't got the luxury of going out to the market and securing our own. So in common with England and Wales, fire and rescue services have received financial support. For us, it was 400,000, and I think the Welsh Government, sadly, in December, recognised that that funding has been pulled. So I can't answer why, but I can only imagine that it was due to their own financial constraints. But sadly, it is a cost that falls to us because our capacity to just stop doing that is not there. We do need to incur that expenditure.
Thank you, Helen. You are right. The Deputy Minister did actually write to ourselves to say that because of the financial constraints facing the Welsh Government, that was one of the things that they weren't prepared to fund going forward. Councillor Mark Young, Mark?
Jock and Val, Chair, and just want to say how good the meeting we all had after Christmas was. You can't beat meeting face to face on difficult issues, so I hope we take that approach moving forward. And just one question: if members were mindful to go for the 9.9, and I'm saying if, the one which will stick out for everyone is the PPE, deferred buying that for the wildfire personal protective clothing. Could the budget, because it's quite a large budget, could half be bought this year and half the following year, just so we don't have any? Because it's a surprise we are the only fire authority in Wales, it says, which doesn't have it. So could that compromise be fitted in within the budget? Because it is a small amount if we've done it that way on the whole budget. So just that question, please. Thank you, Chair.
Good question.
Thank you very much. I think we would agree it is also a priority for our staff. I can't give a definitive confirmation that it could be managed, but what we could certainly ensure is that in the event of any capacity within the budget, that could be the first call on that. Because it is something that it's a deferred purchase. It's not something that we're walking away from, because I think we would all agree it's absolutely critical for the staff. So I'm afraid I can't give you the absolute assurance that we could manage it, but I can absolutely confirm that it would be the first thing that we would purchase if there was capacity.
Okay. So, Chair, if I can just come back on that, so it would be a priority, and we could look at doing it over 2 years rather than a lump sum in 2 years in the second year. Yeah, thank you, Giacomo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I can see that the Treasurer has got his hand up, so I'll invite Sir David to come in first, and then Councillor Brian Apsley. Diolch, David.
Dwi'n hapus i'r cynghorydd Brian Apsley fi'n gynta, o'n i'n disgwyl i'r aelodau wedi deud gynta, Cadeirydd.
Okay, diolch yn fawr. Brian, over to you first. Thank you. Brian, can you hear us? You're on mute at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Treasurer. Not only was the explanation given by Gareth good for new members, it was a good reminder for the older members. More experienced members, if you like, not older members. Gareth, could I ask you a question and then can carry on with what I was going to say? You mentioned the tax implications that we have to consider. Would that include council tax considerations?
Yes, Chair. Any publicly funded service is under a responsibility, and that's both, as I said, both officers and elected members, because we are funded by taxation, to keep funding or to keep our expenditure as low as possible, whilst delivering the responsibilities that are entrusted to us. So we mustn't waste money, but we do have to fulfil our statutory duties. And members will recall the audit and the audit committee and exec panel meetings before Christmas, where we were talking about industrial action. But in the context of that, I outlined to all members the extent of the duties upon us as a fire and rescue authority. Here we have a responsibility to respond to and fight fires. We have a responsibility to attend civil emergencies. We also have responsibilities to prevent fires and to deal with road traffic situations in the same way, attend them and prevent them if at all possible. So, and we have to do all of that within the context of our responsibilities to our employees, whilst at the same time, and this is a lot of balls to juggle, I realise, all at once, whilst at the same time trying to keep taxation as low as possible, including council tax.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. It is a difficult position for us all to be in, considering what's going on because of the cost of living, etc. But I'm concerned that even the figure of 9.9% would be, and I know there's no science in averaging the CPI over a number of months, but we must consider that the CPI at the beginning of, the end of last year and the beginning of this year ran at 5.4% in December and changed significantly in April to around the 9% mark. And obviously it's peaked, well, hopefully peaked at 11.1%. I'm back now to 10.7. If you did look at the average over the 12 months, again, I will repeat, I know this is not a science, you shouldn't be averaging percentages, but it would not come to 9.9%, that's for sure. It would come something like 8.15%. And the other concern I've got, when you just look at figures, is that the contribution from the local authorities has risen by 30% over since 2017, when we all know that inflation was extremely low for a period of 5 years or 6 years. So in the overall context and the overall, and I mentioned the taxes, if you consider that it's inevitable that this will have an effect on all council taxes from all authorities, I would suggest it's inevitable, then 30% since 2017 would be well above the average for inflation over that time. So it's a major concern that this will have a major impact on the council taxes of all our authorities. And I accept what you said earlier, what our responsibilities are. We are primarily here as part of the team looking after the FRA. So, but it will, no doubt, I would suggest, I'm not sure of any authorities who've got any money hidden away that could help this situation. So it is going to have an effect on council tax, in my view. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Brian. It seems very opportune for the Treasurer to come in now. Diolch yn fawr, Dafydd.
Ie, diolch cadeirydd. Ar ddechrau cyfarfod, na'r cynghorydd Nigel Smith ddiolch i'r cadeirydd a'r is-cadeirydd am ei gwaith yn trafod efo'r arweinyddion y chwe cyngor. Mae rai fi gyfadda mi oedd presenoldeb a dylanwad y cynghorydd Dylan Rhys yn y cyfarfod efo'r arweinyddion dydd Gwener yn allweddol i gyrraedd, dwi'n meddwl be gathon ni oedd consensus yn sgil hynny. So ni'n hoffi diolch i chi gyd am eich rôl chi mewn trafodaethau perthnasol. Da ni gyd wedi bod yn trafod hyn sawl tro ers yr cyfarfod yn mis Hydref, ers y pwyllgora ar y 12 o Ragfyr, yn y gweithgor yn Llanelwy ar y trydydd, a dwi'n yn sicr yn cytuno fo cynghorydd Mark Young, mi oedd hi'n yn dda iawn cael cwrdd wynab yn wynab i drafod mater mor sensitif. A yn fwy na hynny, sawl un o chi dwi'n gwybod wedi bod yn trafod cyllideb ag ardoll yr awdurdod tân o fewn eich cyngor chi yn ystod y pythefnos dwytha. A dwi'n gwybod bod sawl swyddog a cynghorydd wedi cyfrannu yn gydwybodol iawn i gyrraedd lle yda ni. Da ni bellach yn trafod, mae yna ddau opsiwn ger bron, ond mae'n debyg na'r un da ni yn mynd i lanio yna fo ydy'r cynnydd 9.9% yn yr ardoll. A swn i yn gwerthfawrogi'ch cefnogaeth chi i'r awgrym yna fel isafswm. Mi fydda'n wneud hynny yn golygu defnyddio mwy o reserfa, £100 arall ar ôl defnyddio ta 3 miliwn o reserfa yn y flwyddyn gyfredol. Bydda'n mynd yn is na'r 9.9% yn marn i yn ormod o risg, ac ddim ond yn gohirio problem yn hytrach na i ddatrys. Da ni'n eisiau bod mewn lle, da ni'n yma heddiw efo cynnydd go sylweddol oherwydd chwyddiant, fel oedd yr siaradwr blaenorol yn cyfeirio ato fo, ond hefyd oherwydd efallai bod ni heb godi digon llynydd. Oedd yr awdurdod tân wedi gorfod, amseru mynd i gyllideb cyn bod yr Llywodraeth Cymru wedi datgan y setliad drafft i awdurdodau llynedd, ac mi oedd setliad llynedd yn dipyn uwch na be oedd y disgwyl ar y diwedd. Mae yna rhyw gem yn ei bellach efo Llywodraeth Cymru lle maen nhw'n yn dychryn rhywun efo straeon o setliad is, a wedyn troi allan chydig yn uwch ac yn disgwyl round of applause amdano fo. Ond mae'r setliad am y 2 flynedd wedi bod yn decach na be oedden ni'n disgwyl. Ac dros y 2 flynedd, pe bai chi'n mynd am y 9.9%, mae hynny dros 2 flynedd yn is na lefel y setliad cyfartalog i'r cynghora. A dwi'n meddwl bod y arweinyddion y cynghora yn gyffredinol yn gweld tegwch yn mynd am y lefel yna. Wedyn, dwi ddim eisiau mynd yn is na hynny. Mi fyswn ni'n rhybuddio pe bai rhywun yn mynd yn is fo hynny am achosi trafferthion. Am i orffan, swn i'n just atgoffa chi, mae'r 9.9% plus yr elfen o grant pensiwn sy'n mynd i gael ei gynnwys yn yr setliad terfynol i'r awdurdodau lleol. Mi oedd y cynghorydd Mark Young yn gofyn sa hwnnw'n yn y gweithgor, yn gofyn sa hwnnw'n earmarked, wedi glusnodi i'r pwrpas. Fydd o ddim, mae'n debyg fydd o'n rhydd yn y setliad terfynol, ond wedi gynyddu. A'r dealltwriaeth sgynna i a Helen efo'r trosaryddion ydy, nawn ni 9.9, a beth bynnag ydy'r lefel y grant pensiwn sy'n cael ei ychwanegu i'r grant ar gyfer y cynghorau unigol. Wedyn, mae hwnnw'n hollol niwtral, ond yn bwysig i chi fod yn cynnwys yn y penderfyniad heddiw. Diolch, Cadeirydd.
Diolch yn fawr, David. There were some hands being raised as you were speaking, but they've gone down. But I have got one hand still up, which is Councillor Gwynfor. Gwynfor, drosodd i chi, diolch.
Diolch yn fawr, Mr Cadeirydd, ac os gai diolch yn fawr i'r swyddogion am yr adroddiad a'r holl waith sydd wedi mynd i fewn i baratoi ar gyfer y drafodaeth yma heddiw. Un peth dwi'n gwybod ydy, nes i ddim mynd ar y cyngor a ddim mynd ar yr awdurdod tân i edrych am wneud toriadau i'r gwasanaeth. A dwi'n meddwl bod heddiw y ddiwrnod trist iawn bod da ni mewn gwirionedd yn edrych ar mwy na thebyg roi cyllideb llai i'r awdurdod na fysa'r rhan fwyaf, ond na ni'n hoffi roi. Dwi'n siŵr fysa ni gyd, fel mae Clerc a'r Swyddog Monitron dweud, gyd yn cefnogi roed cael y gwasanaeth gorau posib ac edrych ar yr arian fel yr ail beth. Ond yn anffodus, nid dyna beth ydy reality bywyd, a fel oedd y Clerc a'r Swyddog Monitron atgoffa ni, mae gynna ni gyfrifoldeb at y bobl sy'n talu'r treth cyngor. Rwan ydy'r system treth cyngor ddim y system fysa ni yn ei ddewis, wrth gwrs. Mae'n system sydd yn cosbi y bobl tlota yn y cymdeithas ni fwy na'r bobl cyfoethoca. O rwy'n yn darllen heddiw yn yr Independent bod 1% o'r boblogaeth yn Brydain wan efo 70% o'r cyfoeth. Rwan, o fanna ddylsa'r arian fod yn dod i ariannu pethau fel yr awdurdod tân, fel gwasanaethau cymdeithasol, fel addysg. Ond wrth gwrs, y system sydd gyda ni ydy'r system sydd yn golygu bod y tlawd yn y cymdeithas yn gorfod talu cyfran llawer uwch tuag at gwasanaethau hanfodol yma. Rwan, hefyd, fyswn i yn dweud, fel dwi'n dweud, dwi'n drist iawn efo'r sefyllfa heddiw. A dwi'n siŵr na'r unig bobl a ddedis i hyn yn y gweithdy gafon ni. Yr unig bobl sydd yn hapus bod ni'n trafod hyn, bod ni'n edrych ar doriadau o gwbl, ydy y toriaid yn San Steffan.
Gwynfor, mae ddwy gen i, mae rhaid fi torri ar draws fan hyn. dyn ni ddim eisiau cael political points scoring fan hyn. Dyn ni fod i bod yn non-political wrth ni trafod hyn. So os gai gofyn i chi just manylu ar y cyllideb ni'n trafod a canolbwyntio hynny os o'ch yna. Diolch.
Dwi'n meddwl rhaid roed y resymeg, felly na'n sôn am y toriad, ond yr rheswm da ni'n trafod hyn heddiw ydy bod San Steffan wedi torri ar ei cyllideb i Llywodraeth Cymru, a mae Llywodraeth Cymru felly yn gorfod torri ar ei cyllideb i'r awdurdodau lleol, sydd yn golygu na dyna pam da ni'n trafod heddiw. Dim oes pa ffordd da ni'n eirio fo, mae bob un dim yn wleidyddol, Mr Cadeirydd, a felly diolch i chi am eich arweiniad, ond dwi'n siŵr bod wedi llwyddo i roid yr esboniad llawn pam da ni'n drafod o. Dwi'n modlon symud ymlaen i roi cynnig os da chi isio neu dal yn ôl tan bellach ymlaen.
Digon teg, diolch yn fawr. Nigel, you've got your hand back up. Do you want to come back in? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Gwynfer's sentiments regarding the council taxpayers. We are obviously concerned at a county council level about increasing our precept, but at the end of the day, that precept is paid for by our residents in North Wales, and that is the biggest concern for me. With the authority, obviously, we want to provide the best service that we can. And with that in mind, I just have one final question really for Helen, if she'll bear with me, is the fact that I have a niggling concern that, well, to be truthful, none of us saw this financial issue that we are in this year. The events that are going on in Ukraine have caused us all a financial pain. And we didn't see that coming. And I've still got this cautious thing or a voice in the back of my mind that says, what happens if the unexpected happens again next financial year? So I have a question for Helen, and it's regarding the training centre. And whilst I know it is at the end of its life, if we were to agree the recommendations with the 9.9 increase, if things change, we are not tied, is that correct, to investing in the new training centre?
Thank you, Councillor Smith. That is absolutely correct. The training centre is included as a provision, and that's for the completeness. Members will receive further reports in that respect. So possibly worth noting also that the other piece of work that's ongoing is the fire cover review. So noting that the position is very fluid, the fire cover review will come to members in April, and that will put forward a range of longer-term service provision options as well. So we're very much in that fluid state at the present time. Okay.
Well, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Chief, yourself and David, and obviously the backroom team for all the extensive works that you've done. But I think I do have one more question, really, if you'll bear with me. David, you mentioned about setting the increase to 9.9, and if it was to be set any less than that, or I think your exact words were, we couldn't afford a much lower increase, but you didn't say that it wasn't a definite no. So, David, if it was set at 9%, what would the issues be there?
Yeah, I'm not sure how my Welsh came over in translation of that, but I did say I wouldn't want you to set it lower than 9.9. The reasons being that there's no right or wrong answer in terms of how much to raise it, but the level of risk increases, and we're already running a level of risk. if you'll recall, Nigel, we were at the workshop, and I think Councillor Jeff Evans from Holyhead was saying, "Oh, you've got to have more in than 4% for the pay award." We are running a level of risk already with having only 4%. I would like 5% in for the pay award, but that would increase that levy from 9.9 to something like 10.6 or something. So we're in a position that nobody wants to be, and I think we're taking on a lot of risk going down to 9.9. But I think that's the sort of level we've sort of accepted that we're going to have to deal with. If we go further, the big risk for me is that we'll come around this time next year, we'll be asking for an even higher increase because we've set ourselves an attainable level of savings in the medium term. So it is possible to go anywhere really, but it's only storing up problems for the future. And I think the 9.9 has just about a sort of reasonable challenge for the leadership of the authority to see if we can achieve those savings during the current year.
Well, I appreciate your wise words, and for that purpose, I would like to move the recommendations, Chair, if I could, with the 9.9% increase. We need to be fair to the authority, fair to the councils, but more importantly, also fair to the residents who would be footing the bill at the end of the day.
Thank you,
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. So before we move to a vote, the Chief wants to speak, and there's a few other members have also indicated they want to speak. So we will move to a vote in due course on that. But first of all, if I give everybody a chance to speak, Chief.
Thank you. We've talked a lot this morning about the financial risks and the fact that if we set a budget that is too low to meet the needs, then the budget for next year will have to increase considerably. I think what we haven't focused on is the service risks and the risks to the public. So I would just like to draw members' attention to the risks that are attached to the proposals for the which would bring us to a 9.9% increase. And as long as members are very clear that that is what we're signing up to, both ourselves as officers and yourselves as members, then we can go ahead with a 9.9 increase. So we're talking about the actual response, and that we would be extending our time for travel to a maximum of 35 minutes. I can't, unless you've seen it for yourself, it's hard to see just how much fire can travel within an extra 5 minutes, which puts some additional risks to both firefighters tackling the fire and the public that might be involved in it. And also the other area that we are proposing to reduce is the number of home safety support workers. They have had an excellent track record over the last decade of reducing the number of fires in homes in North Wales. But we accept that this is probably the time to reduce it in order to meet the budget. So I just wanted to bring those to members' attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Councillor Gareth Sandilands, Gareth?
Yeah, I'll make a quick point. It's with a heavy heart that I do this, and listening to the debate, that we have a thorough debate on the workshop, and we've repeated that debate sometimes today. I will be going for a 9.9% increase, and I was going to propose it. It's already been done, so I'd like to propose we go to the vote. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Austin Roberts. Austin?
Diolch yn fawr, Mr Cadeirydd. O'n i'n bach yn ar y deg roed yn llaw i fyny. Na, dwi'n cytuno fo beth sydd wedi cael ei ddweud. Mi ydan ni mewn sefyllfa ariannol argyfyngus, nid yn unig yn y gwasanaeth yma, ond ar hyd yr awdurdodau lleol ac yn y blaen, ac yn wir yn y wlad yn gyffredinol. Does na neb eisiau gwneud toriadau, a does na neb eisiau codi trethu. Ond mae rhaid cofio pa mor bwysig ydy gwasanaeth tân ac
ac achub a'r ffaith bod nhw'n cyflenwi swyddogaeth hynod o bwysig i drigolion Gogledd Cymru. Ac yn aml iawn, da ni'n gofyn yn nhw rhoi i bywydau nhw eu hunain mewn perygl. A dwi yn cyd yn deimlo efo Dawn a'i thîm, mae yn anodd cael balans. A chwarae teg iddyn nhw, maen nhw wedi gwrando na ni ar ôl y cyfarfod a gafon ni, anffurfiol a gafon ni jyst ar ôl Dolig. Pan nathon ni mwy na lai fel consensus dweud, basa ffigwr o dan 10% yn mwy derbyniol. A maen nhw wedi cael hyd i hynny. A beth sydd yn bwysig rwan ydy, yn bod ni yn dechrau'r trafodaethau yma ynglyn â cyllid yn gynt na dydan ni wedi bod, ac efallai ymgynghori yn agosach gyda'r awdurdodau lleol Gogledd Cymru. Dyna y cyfarwyddyd ges i gan fy arweinydd i yng Nghyngor Sir Conwy, y cynghorydd Charles Macwbri, oedd o yn cyd yn deimlo, a mi welodd o synwyr, a mi welodd o bod oedd modd cyfadawdu. Felly dwi'n hynod o falch dweud bod mi fedra i gefnogi 9.9. A gai hefyd diolch am yr adroddiad, a diolch i chi gyd yn y gwasanaeth tân, y swyddogion i gyd am wrando arna ni. Mae hynny, dwi'n meddwl, yn dangos bod gennych chi ddealltwriaeth a bod chi'n barod i gyfaddawdu. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi. Diolch o galon i chi gyd. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Austin, and just for information, the Chief and myself did assure the leaders and the Chief Execs in the meeting that we had Friday morning that going forward, we will certainly look to improve the sort of the communication and the forward planning in this process. Councillor Chris Hughes, Chris?
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Thank you, Chair. As I was probably one of the most outspoken at the workshop that we had, I think it's only right that I comment on this, and I think I have to very much agree with some of the comments, particularly Gwynfo's, that were made before in terms of the impact that council tax has. And I do hope that governments of all levels will look at that at some stage in the future. The ballot formula that's used to identify the funding that comes here isn't fit for purpose. It doesn't reflect the demographics of our country today, and that needs to be recognised. However, I too, like Nigel and Austin, have been in conversation with our leader over the last few days, and I think it's right to agree that that there has been discussions, and I think the consensus is that 9.9% is a reasonable compromise that still has an impact on our residents, but a lesser impact than the previous proposal. So I'm happy to support that proposal, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Dale Sylvester.
Oh, hi, good morning, everyone. We've been very new to this fire authority. Obviously, we're still learning within the role itself. There's just one question that I'd like to ask. A few councillors have mentioned about the meeting with the leaders. Now, did all the leaders within the authorities agree to the 9.9%, or were there any concerns raised by certain leaders within? I'm not asking which leaders, but I'm just wondering if there were certain leaders that had some concerns with the 9.9% raise.
There was a good discussion in the meeting that we had, but they didn't actually make the decision whilst we were present. They had a further discussion later on during the day, and then we've received feedback subsequently to say that they can live with a 9.9% increase, which is difficult for them, but also very difficult for us. But that was the consensus that's been reached. I don't know if the Chief wants to say anything further.
Yes, as you say, there was a good debate in advance of that, but as you might expect, They wanted to discuss it in private, and then I caught up with Councillor McCoby later on, and he conveyed that they were in agreement that 9.9% can be accepted for this year.
Councillor Paul Cunningham, Deputy Chair. Diolch, Paul.
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd. I'm fortunate, Chair, that I live in an area where I have got 5 fire stations that cover my town, a full-time fire station and 4 retained fire stations. So I'm lucky, and as a former firefighter, I know how fire can spread quickly. And also I have worked in fire safety, so I know the work that the fire safety teams do. But my concern is if we go below 9.9, then the response time to parts of North Wales where we've got a very much rural area, they deserve the best that we can provide. So I will be supporting the 9.9, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Well, I am going to refer members now to the recommendations, which are contained at paragraph 5 of the report. And I'm going to read these out to you now so that we are all clear as to what we're actually voting on. So members are asked to note the planning work undertaken to reduce the budget requirement for 2003-24, including associated risks and uncertainties, and the Chief has drawn attention to the risks, to approve the authority's revenue budget for 2023-24 in accordance with the officer's recommendation, with a total budget requirement of, and then we're saying 43.31 million, which is option 3, with service changes bringing the increase down to 9.9%. Further to consultation with members to approve the levies on billing authorities based on an average increase in contributions from constituent authorities of the £3.9 million of 9.9%, in addition to the pension grant contributions to be transferred into Council's final RSG settlement as set out in Appendix 4, and to approve the authority's capital budget for 2023-24 as set out in Appendix 3 and endorse the medium-term financial strategy. So that is what has been proposed and seconded, and that's what we are being, you as members now are being invited to approve. Will you show if you approve those recommendations, please? Okay, and I'm going to ask, does anybody disagree? Does anybody want to oppose the recommendation? I can't see any hands raised opposing the recommendations. So
I think there is one, Chair, sorry.
Yes, Chair, I was going to say I can see one as well.
Oh yeah, Councillor Beverly Pojo, yes, okay, that's anybody else?
No, Chair, I think everybody's voted.
Okay, right, thank you. So can I just thank members once again for their...
Sorry, Chair, it is possible that there might be some abstentions, maybe worth just checking.
Has anybody, yes, thank you, Gareth. Any abstentions? Okay, the recommendations have been overwhelmingly passed. Sorry, Councillor Dale Sylvester?
Yeah, it's just an abstention, that was all.
Thank you, noted. So it has been overwhelmingly passed, and can I just thank members for their contributions and involvement in what has been a uniquely difficult budget setting process, and I'm hoping that we won't have to go down the same road next year. Diolch yn fawr pawb. Thank you, everyone. So going back to the agenda, so we are now going to take what was item 9, which is the capital strategy and treasury management. And this is more of an update because it has been through the audit committee, but it's over to Helen again to introduce this report, please. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. This paper follows very nicely on from the budget setting paper and relates to the planning, delivery and funding of our capital projects. The management of capital expenditure and finance is quite a technical area, and it's also important because it creates the foundations necessary to deliver services in the short, medium, and also the longer term. So very much decisions made today around capital impact not only this year, but often if it relates to a building can impact for the next 50 years. Similarly, the purchase of a fire appliance today will maintain and retain that fire appliance for 15 years. But more importantly, what the capital strategy and the treasury management strategy does, it also considers the affordability of these assets over the same period. So today's paper isn't about approving the capital expenditure programme per se, but is much wider as it considers how the programme will be funded. Notably, as a fire authority, we don't receive a capital allocation, and therefore the main source of funds that we have for the capital programme is through our external borrowing. We do have some other minor sources that would include grants from the Welsh Government, and also if we sell assets, that can be recycled then into the capital programme. So what I'd like to do is draw members' attention to the capital and treasury management strategies, which are set out in pages 26 to 58 of the pack today, but they also include the revenue provision statement as well. And that's quite a crucial document because that's very much around the affordability and the costs today. It's a very technical document. It is very lengthy and was discussed within the audit committee. But the key points of note for yourselves as members. The authority only undertakes external borrowing for need. So what we can't do is borrow for revenue purposes, and what we can't do is borrow in advance of that need. And otherwise, we don't borrow for investment purposes. And therefore, from our perspective, all of our surplus cash is held in call accounts only, and we don't invest by loaning cash to third parties. Therefore, the risk of counterparty default for us is very minimal, and I'm pleased to confirm that none have been experienced this financial year. Our external borrowing is forecast to be 22 million by the year end, which is within the capital financing limit set of 29 million. And this has been achieved through the use of internal borrowing. And that means that if we have surplus cash, rather than going to the market to borrow for capital purpose, we use that working capital in the short term. Of note is that our reserves are all cash back, so they're our revenue reserves, and we use the cash relating to those. So at some point, if you use your reserves, you then have to borrow against it. Our borrowing is all fixed term, but over the last year, we've had a number of loans that have matured, which has meant that we've experienced interest rate increases. And the revenue impact for our borrowing is set out on page 41. And capital costs now account for 7% of our revenue spend. And those capital costs are twofold. It's the capital cost of borrowing, they're your interest payments, but it's also a charge to revenue for using it. So if we have a fire appliance for 15 years, 1/15 of the value gets charged to revenue. Where we do need to borrow, we generally utilise the loans offered by the Public Works Loans Board. That's part of the Debt Management Office of the UK government. Recognising that it's a very technical area and it's not something that we do on a day-to-day basis, we use the professional services of a company called Arling Close. And they're experts in this field and they work across the public sector. So that's by way of an assurance to members is that we are supported in that. You'll note also in the report that they provide a very comprehensive economic and interest rate forecast. It's a very detailed report and I'm happy to take any questions from members that they may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Any questions or comments from members for Helen, please? Dafydd, ydych chi eisiau dod I fewn, diolch.
Ie, ddau fewn y syth ar hwn. Mae'r math yma eitem, dio byth yn cael llawer o gwestiynau mewn cyfarfodydd perthnasol yn y cynghora chwaith, achos mae o'n gymlath iawn I aelodau fod yn dallt. Ac swn i'n dweud bod rhaid I chi radda fod yn ymddiried yna I a Helen a'r ymgynghorwyr Arling Close I fod yn rheoli'r agwedd yma yn briodol. Ond mae yna bwrpas o yma, da chi'n awdurdodi yr borrowing limits sydd ar tudalen 40 heddiw. Ac dwi'n meddwl bod o'n galonogol hefyd bod Helen yn cadarnhau yn ei cyflwyniad llafar bod yna dim o'r buddsoddiadau wedi diffoltio. Wedyn, Dwi'n mynd disgwyl I chi fod yn dallt pob rhan o'r papur yma, ond yn gobeithio fedrwch chi gefnogi'r argymhellion os gwelwch yn dda. Mi fydd yna angen addasu rhyw fymryn ar yr ffigurau dwi'n credu, neith Helen gadarnhau hynny, bod amball un efo yma wedi predicated ar yr 11.9 ytrach na 9.9. Ond yn gyffredinol, di hynny mewn cael effaith ar y prif bethau yr author's limit fydd hynny rhyw fath.
Diolch Dafydd. Gwynfod, ydych chi eisiau dod I fewn? Diolch Gwynfod.
Ie, diolch yn fawr, o'n i falch iawn o glywed sylwadau Dafydd yma yna, bod dim disgwyl I ni ddall bob gair sydd yn yr adroddiad. Ond hefyd, fyswn i'n dweud, oes na wirioneddol ddisgwyl I ni ddarllen bob gair yn yr adroddiad yma. 36 tudalan, dwi'n meddwl bod o'n adroddiad, dwi'n siŵr oes a neb yma heddiw, sa rhyw anarac go iawn yma yn ymplith ni wedi darllen bob gair yn yr adroddiad yma. A dwi'n meddwl fysa fo gymorth os fysa'n bosib cael pe ma'n adroddiadau mawr, dwi'n dallt pam maen nhw'n gorfod dŵad I ni, dwi'n dallt pam maen nhw'n gorfod bod yn drylwyr, ond fysa fo gymorth mawr I ni fel aelodau, dwi'n siŵr, os fysa'n bosib cael crynodeb o'r hyn sy'n digwydd ag lle I edrych os da ni'n siŵr am bethau yn cyfeirio, a dwi'n siŵr sa'r crynodeb o ryw 2 tudalan yn gallu cyfeirio a dweud bob dim da ni angen gwybod am yr adroddiad yma.
Diolch Gwynfod. I would make the point that it has been, though, to the audit committee, and I think I'm right in saying that the reason that it couldn't be moved forward at the audit committee was because we were waiting to see what was happening with the actual budget, which is obviously linked to this paper, but obviously we're in a position now to move forward. Any other comments or questions? Helen, you want to come back?
Thank you. We'll certainly take Councillor Owen's comments on board, and certainly all of the update reports that will come to the Fire Authority and the Audit Committee throughout the year will ensure that there's an executive summary contained within those. So we recognise that it's a highly technical area, and we'll take that on board.
Diolch Helen, thank you. I'm looking to see if somebody would be prepared to propose and second the recommendations in that case.
Happy to do that, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. Councillor John Brynmore Hughes in Ionawr. Thank you. Thank you, John. So the recommendations are contained at paragraph 7 of the report, which says members are asked to note the mid-year position for the Treasury management activities for 2022-23 and approve the capital and Treasury management strategies and the minimum revenue provision statement for 2023-24, subject to any amendments necessary following approval of the final revenue and capital budgets for 2023-24, and in the event of any amendments to the draft revenue and capital budgets for 2023-24, delegate approval of those strategies and MRP statement to the executive panel at its meeting on the 20th of March 2023. Have I got that right, Helen? Sorry, I misplaced my mute. Yes, that's correct. So if there are any fundamental changes, we'll bring those through to the exec panel. Thank you. So will members indicate they approve the report and recommendations? Diolch yn fawr, that's unanimous. So we now go back to the original item 7 of the agenda, which is the financial outturn for 2022-23. And it's back to you again, Helen, please. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you. This is the third and final report on the agenda this morning, and it relates to this year's, so that's 2022-23 financial performance and position. I think it's fair to say that an awful lot of what we've discussed already in terms of the budget planning for next year also is so very relevant to this year. So the budget for this financial year was set in December 2021, and the net expenditure approved at that time was 39.41 million. That's the amount that we've levied upon the local councils of North Wales. And when we set the budget, it was noted that there are a number of factors that may impact on this financial year. They included the COVID uncertainties and the fact that pay awards hadn't been finalised. And sadly, as you'll be aware, that remains the case, certainly for our firefighters. The COVID uncertainties are multifactorial, and it was the impact of lockdowns, because when we set the budget, it was very unclear about whether there would be further lockdowns. We were experiencing high levels of staff sickness. It was also the need to defer some of our projects.
That includes such things as building renovations, some of our supply chain difficulties that we're experiencing, for example, in our fleet department, and also general inflation. So at the end of 2021-22, we carried forward a number of our deferred items of expenditure, and we carried those into earmarked reserves. I think what we recognised at that time that the expenditure was necessary, but hadn't progressed as we planned. Those COVID uncertainties, I think somebody referenced, I think it was Councillor Smith, the war in Ukraine, and therefore our uncertainties have been exacerbated this year. We've also experienced those global financial challenges, and they for us included the hike in interest rates, further exacerbation of those supply chain issues and those inflationary pressures. And for us, it was very much the cost of our fuel and the cost of our gas and electricity. Consequently, throughout the year, what we've had to do is review our expenditure levels and ensure that we can carefully manage our financial position. So turning to some of the major areas of spend, our pay awards, when we set the budget, our medium-term financial plan, were anticipated to be 2%. These are nationally agreed, and that was the public sector planning assumption at that time. So recognising that we set our budget a little bit earlier than either local authorities or the health boards. We did recognise it as a risk when the budget was set, and since that time, that risk has come to fruition. Firstly, with the local government pay settlement, that was an uplift for all staff of 1,925. And for us, that equated to over 6% for our local government employees. You'll also be aware that the firefighter settlement hasn't been agreed, and there's a ballot for strike action that closes on the 30th of January. During the financial year, we've also had to address a national legal challenge across the sector, which related to holiday pay on overtime. This dated back over 6 years, and it was necessary to make further payments of £300,000, and that was for our backdated holiday pay. That was one of the areas that we knew that it was coming, so we'd already established an earmarked reserve. But this will also now form part of our base expenditure, and therefore uplifts for overtime are about 12% to recognise that holiday pay. Members will also note from the report that our variable pay expenditure is forecast to be about £900,000 this year, and that's been necessary to maintain the availability of our pumps, to address the demand that we've experienced from those spate conditions, an extremely hot summer, and also to cover our sickness. However, during the COVID years, a number of our schemes were deferred, and these mainly related to facilities project, technical operations and fleet. And now we've been able to progress those during 2022-23. Those costs will be met from reserves, but alongside bringing those projects in to fruition, we've also had to experience those supply chain difficulties and those additional costs. I'm sure we're all aware of it, but the cost of steel especially and the availability of contractors has been a real challenge. Unfortunately, despite the government supply for energy costs, we are experiencing residual cost pressures against our energy budget for this year. We've just spoken about the cost of borrowing and the very fact that some of our loans matured and we needed to replace those, but at the same time, the cost of borrowing had exceeded our planning assumptions. And again, we've had to utilise the earmarked reserve. So that earmarked reserve recognised this risk and it was appropriate to do so. So in broad summary, the net expenditure will be in line with the budget set, but to achieve this, we will need to use general reserves to meet the additional payroll costs arising from the higher than expected pay awards that we're anticipating. And the earmarked reserves will also be used to fund projects that were deferred due to the COVID restrictions and the additional costs arising from interest rate increases. Notably, at the time of writing this report, it's anticipated that our capital spend will be 3.4 million, although again, this isn't yet finalised, and at this stage we are experiencing some delays. This includes the availability of materials such as steel for the training towers, as well as contractor capacity. So I'm happy to take any queries or questions on the report, Chair.
Thank you, Helen. Before I throw it open, I just want to draw members' attention to paragraph 18 of the report. And there's a sentence there, paragraph 18, which says the overtime costs associated with maintaining service availability and to cover sickness are expected to be £900,000 at the year end. I'm well aware that the service leadership team regularly monitors sickness levels within the service, but it's information that we don't receive as members, and I've raised that with the chief because I feel that we should have that management information in terms of performance monitoring. So the chief has agreed that in the future we will get details in terms of management information on sickness levels within the service, just for your information. Okay, throwing it out to any comments or questions. Nigel, thank you, Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I would like to move the recommendations if I could, and thank Helen and the finance team for the excellent work they do, and for this report and for the previous reports. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. Do we have a seconder? I think Austin got his hand up just about before everybody else. Diolch yn fawr, Austin. The recommendations are contained at paragraph 4 of the report, which is members are asked to note the draft revenue and capital outturn project projections for 2022-23 financial year as detailed within the report. Note the risks associated with inflation and supply chain issues. Note the risks associated with the ongoing pay negotiations, and approve the use of earmarked and general fund reserves. Will you indicate if you support the recommendations, please? Okay, diolch yn fawr, that's unanimously carried. And we're back on track now with the agenda. So the next item is item number 10, and I'd like to welcome Avos Lake from Audit Wales to the meeting, who's going to do an introduction on the role of Audit Wales. Diolch yn fawr, Avos.
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd, bore da. Mae gennym ni cyflwyniad byr, os ydych chi'n dal efo fi am eiliad na i rannu fy sgrin. Gwerthfawrogi rhywun i chi rhoi rhyw thumbs up os di hwnna wedi dod i fyny. Mae anghydweithwyr i Nick yn mynd i ddechrau ni drwy'r cyflwyniad yma.
Could I just say that you are sharing your screen, but there's nothing there. It's black.
Okay, thank you. Bear with me.
Do you want me to share my screen, Ross?
Please. Can you hear me, Nick? So yeah, I think my laptop's had a bit of a crash. Thank you.
Technology always lets you down, Eros.
Has that turned up?
I think Eros is still sharing his screen. He needs to stop sharing, I believe. That might help.
Yeah, it's still showing as you're sharing, Ross.
Did you want to send your presentation to me and I'll try sharing it?
I think it's because Ross is sharing his screen and his computer seems to have frozen. Apologies for this.
Is there any way we can cut his connection? Because otherwise I think we'll be here till after lunch. Ooh.
I have looked. I've changed it so that more than one person can share.
There we go.
I'll try with mine now. But let me know if that turns up, please.
Yes. Yeah, we got that. Great.
Right. So apologies for the IT difficulties at the start. What we've got before for members today, Chair, is a presentation that outlines and hopefully explains the work of the Auditor General for Wales and the work of Audit Wales. So Eros and I will run through this presentation. Please feel free to come back with any questions at the end and we'll hopefully be able to answer those. We thought it's a helpful introduction to our work and may fill in some of the gaps about the differences between external audit and internal audit. So just to start the ball rolling, in terms of Audit Wales, I'll just put this onto
full screen if you could.
Yeah, I will do. Sorry, I'm having. There we go. That should be up now. So, as I say, it's really just an introduction to the work of Audit Wales and the Auditor General. So the term itself, you'll often see us defined as Audit Wales, but in terms of the legislation that underpins the work of the organisation, in the legislation, it sets out there is a requirement for an Auditor General for Wales and the establishment of a Wales Audit Office. And each of these are defined in terms of the acts that underpin our work. So the Auditor General is the person who has responsibility for auditing and reporting on the performance, financial and other, of Welsh public bodies. And that pretty much covers every major organisation that delivers public services in Wales, with the exception of some elements of the work of the police. And then the Wales Audit Office provides the staff and other resources that the Auditor General requires to undertake and deliver that programme of work. So together we are known as Audit Wales. In terms of our organisation, we have three key aims. The first one is to assure people that the money that public services have available to them is being managed well. Secondly, to explain how that money is being used and how that's assessing and helping address and meet people's needs. And then finally, to identify opportunities that would support organisations to take forward improvement. So that's broadly the work of Audit Wales. In terms of the legislation, just a very brief introduction, just so you get a sense of the type of things that we are required to deliver against. The Public Audit Wales Act that was passed in 2004 sets out the core areas of activity that we have responsibility for. So the main areas that we look at firstly are around the authority's financial statements to ensure that money is being properly treated and accounted for. Secondly, we have responsibilities to ensure that organisations put in place what is called value for money arrangements, that they are using resources economically, efficiently and effectively. And then finally, we have powers to examine and report on both value for money, but also delivery of statutory obligations and requirements through our local government studies programme of work. So that covers the sort of core functions of that particular piece of legislation. Then in 2015, the Welsh Government introduced the Future Generations Act, and that also places responsibilities on the Auditor General. So within the confines of this particular piece of legislation, we are required to look at how public bodies, the 44 listed bodies, are operating, and particularly in accordance with the Sustainable Development Principle, which really boils down to have you set wellbeing objectives, and are you demonstrating that you're delivering against the 5 ways of working. This work is very much local. The outputs can be annually, or it could be over the 5-year period for each time we assess WFG Act requirements. But the important thing is that the work is brought together for the final year of each Senedd term for the Auditor General to really publish a position report that just summarises where the public sector is at this time in delivering the expectations of the Act. So the next report is expected in 2025. In terms of how we operate, something that's been established by the Public Audit Wales Act 2013 is for us to have what we call the Code of Audit Practice. So this sets out how we interpret the international standards for auditing, but also how we will work with the bodies that we audit locally. And it's got 4 key principles, which I think are quite helpful for you just to be aware of. Firstly, that our work very much is trying to pin down and understand and report against how money is being spent, but with a public focus. So we do spend time thinking about how best to get information across to members of the public so they really understand both our role, but also the role of organisations that we audit. Secondly, and really importantly, as an organisation, we are independent of Welsh Government. So we don't take account of Welsh Government in setting our programme of work. We do consult with them as we do with other public bodies in Wales, but ultimately it's within the Auditor General's gift to determine how he delivers the work and what work he focuses on. We're also very conscious that as public bodies, you have lots of responsibilities and you have to deliver lots of different, quite challenging services So the way we undertake our work is to ensure that we are proportionate, that we do not get in the way of you delivering the day job as much as possible. And when we do make requests, that we try to do that as efficiently as we can. And then finally, because we are looking at public resources and how money is being used, we are very conscious that we have to also be seen as accountable. That's why we have a board in place within Audit Wales that holds the Auditor General and the Wales Audit Office to account. And that's why we really do seek to report against the standards that have been set internationally and nationally for audit work. So that's just a very quick introduction to the legislation. In terms of what that means in reality, the next part of the presentation talks about our core areas of activity. So the parts that you'll probably come across mostly in terms of your work as members on the authority relate to two key areas, financial audit and performance audit, and I'll run through those in a little bit more detail. But we also have probably a third area, which is slightly more remote from the work of the authority, unless there are certain issues that are raised with us. And this tends to be where we respond to queries from members of the public, or a request for us to investigate or undertake some commission work, mostly by Welsh Government, or respond to correspondence where people have raised issues of concern with us. And another arm of our work then is the good practice exchange, which I'll touch on at the end. So in terms of our work and the work of internal audit, just to sort of explain the differences so you are clear as members what you can expect from the two areas. So in terms of external audit, that's the Audit Wales, we are statutory auditors. Our work is determined by the legislation I've just touched on, but the way we do that and the way we deliver it is very much at the discretion of the Auditor General, but we are required to work against the legislation directly. So our work is defined within the legislation. We can't go outside of that. We do develop a work program annually that's based on the risks that we see within each organisation, but also the wider sector that we're auditing. And we do present this to members to ensure that you're aware of the work that we're planning to undertake annually. This is different to internal audit, where the work emanates from and is determined and signed off by management and approved by the authority. And there's an accounting officer that will oversee that programme of work. And it's very much focused on the specific risks within the Fire and Rescue Authority directly. The one thing I would say is that we do seek to ensure that we don't replicate and do the same work on an annual basis. And wherever possible, we do try and avoid duplicating where we can. And obviously, as external auditors, we make good use of and draw on the findings of your internal audit work. That hopefully gives you a sense of where the differences rest. So I mentioned that we produce a work programme, and this is really a joint document that covers both our respective responsibilities for financial audit and performance audit. And this is usually presented to the authority in the spring. The plan sets out our planned and proposed areas of work, the timetable for the work, our estimate of how much the work will actually cost, and who will undertake the work. And then we follow that up with an update on a 6-monthly point, just to say where we are in terms of delivering against the plan that we've set. So members should see the plan come through to them and the 6-monthly update on progress. In terms of the work we undertake itself then, just to give you a bit of sense of what that means, for financial audit, it's very much tied to our audit of the accounts and ensuring that the information that is presented to you, the stuff that Helen has gone through in detail today, reports to the sort of relevant accounting standards. And the two key things for us really is to use what we call the concept of materiality. That means we don't look at absolutely everything, but we look at sufficient information to allow us to be able to come to a conclusion. And the second one then is to ensure that when we look at the information and review the accounts, that it is a true and fair view opinion that we provide. Ultimately, this leads to a confirmation on the annual government statement as well, which we look to see that that's sort of delivered within the expectations based on our knowledge. In terms of outputs, we do produce a report on the financial statements, and this sets out our work, provides what we call an opinion on the truth and fairness of the statements, and then summarizing the extent of any corrected and uncorrected errors that we identify from our work. And this tends to take the form of a letter and is presented to the organisation, and we're quite happy to present that and run through it with you. So that gives you a sense of what we do with the financial side of things. Hopefully Euros has rejoined the meeting because he's going to run through the next slides. Euros?
I have, thank you, Nick, and apologies to members for my technical hitch. Na I fynd â ni trwy'r sleidiau ar yr ochr archwilio perfformiad. Felly yn ychwanegol i'r gwaith archwilio ariannol, mae gennym ni raglen waith archwilio perfformiad hefyd. ym mhob corff llywodraeth leol. A mae sail y gwaith yma fel arfer yn disgyn o dan y ddeddf archwilio cyhoeddus, lle da ni'n edrych ar drefniadau priodol, o dan y ddeddf llesiant cenedlaethau'r dyfodol, lle da ni'n ystyried ar egwyddor datblygu cynaladwy, neu o dan gyfuniad o'r ddau. A mae raglen waith perfformiad ni mewn llywodraeth leol, mae yn amrywio o un corff i'r llall, ond yn fras, mewn cynghorau sir, da ni'n tueddu i wneud astudiaethau thematig, da ni'n gwneud gwaith lleol sy'n seledig ar risg penodol i'r corff, a mae gennym ni brosiect mwyn asesu a monitro be di risgau'r perthnasol hefyd. Yn yr awdurdodau tan y gachub, mae raglen waith rhywfaint wahanol a wedi ddilwrau a adlewyrchu'r sector yma'n benodol. Felly mae'n gyfuniad o waith lleol a thematig yn yr ystyr bod gennym ni derfyniadau asesu risg a monitro perfformiad, a dyma lle mae prif ffocws y gwaith lleol yn deillio ohono fo bob blwyddyn. A dyma yna elfennau thematig i'r rhaglen waith hefyd wedyn, yn yr ystyr yn bod ni'n tueddu edrych ar bethau o safbwynt cenedlaethol sy'n ystyried y 3 gwasanaeth. Thanks, Nick. If you could move on, please. O ran y ddeddf llesiant cenedlaethau'r dyfodol wedyn, oedden ni'n cyffwrdd ar y ffocws y gennym ni ar yr egwyddor datblygu cynaladwy ar 5 ffordd o weithio sy'n gysylltiedig efo'r egwyddor yna, so gweithio mewn ffordd integredig, gweithio nataliol, cydweithio, ystyried yr hir dymor a chynnwys pobl a chymunedau wrth siapio'ch gwaith. Dwi'n meddwl, prif beth i nodi o ran y sleid yma ydy bod rhain yn ystyriaethau craidd rwan ym mhob darn o waith da ni'n gwneud yn hytrach na darn o waith yn eu hunan. Thank you, Nick. Ar ben y gwaith lleol wedyn, mae gennym ni raglen o astudiaethau cenedlaethol mewn llywodraeth leol hefyd. A fel rhan o'r raglen honno, da ni'n tueddu i gymryd 2 neu 3 topig bob blwyddyn ac ystyried heini ar draws llywodraeth leol yn ei gyfanrwydd. Fel enghraifft, y llynydd oedd y 3 topig yn cyd-fynd yr ei daclus, oedden ni'n edrych ar gennym ni astudiaeth yn ystyried sut mae cynghorau yn mynd i'r afal efo clodi, a nathon ni gyhoeddi adroddiad cenedlaethol ar hwnnw fis Tachwedd y llynydd. Ynglwm â'r her enfawr yna wedyn o ddelu efo clodi, da ni wedi ystyried mewn 2 astudiaeth ar wahân. Gyntaf, sut mae cynghorau'n grymuso pobl a chymunedau neu mwy dros eu hunan, a hefyd sut mae cynghorau'n cefnogi ac yn datblygu mentra cymdeithasol. Thank you, Nick. O edrych yn ôl wedyn, dwi'n meddwl eich bod hi'n deg deud bod rhai o'r astudiaethau cenedlaethol yma o bosib argyrion beth sy'ch chi'n ystyried fel gwaith sy'n uniongyrchol berthnasol i'r gwasanaeth tân, os ydych chi'n edrych ar bethau fel adfywio, canol trefi ag ati. O mae'r mwyafrif yn sicr yn berthnasol ac yn gorgyffwrdd efo gwaith y gwasanaeth tân. A dwi'n meddwl yr enghraifft mwyaf penodol sy'n gwneud ddiweddar ydy darn o waith sy'n ni ar gweill ar hyn o bryd eleni yn edrych ar ddiogelwch adeiladau. Mae hwnna'n rhywbeth i gadw golwg amdano fo lle. Thank you, Nick. O ran be fedrwch chi ddisgwyl fydd yn dod ger eich bron chi fel aelodau wedyn, bob blwyddyn mae gennym ni grynodeb archwilio blynyddol, fel rheol yn cael ei gyhoeddi yn chwarter olaf o flwyddyn, a mae hwn yn crynhoi canfyddiadau bob darn o waith perthnasol da ni wedi gynnal yn ystod y flwyddyn. Diolch, Nick. O ran yr adroddiadau eraill wedyn, fydd yn tueddu ddod i'r awdurdod, mae'r gwaith perfformiad lleol da ni'n ei gynnal yn cael ei gyhoeddi mewn adroddiadau penodol a bydd rheini yn cael ei gyflwyno i chi, a mae rhein jyst yn crynhoi'r un mwyaf diweddar yn Ngogledd Cymru. Mae nhw ar gael ar yn gwefan ni, a yn amlwg fyddwn ni'n trafod yr adroddiad ar allyriadau carbon yn yr eitem nesaf. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Ross.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Ross. Just to conclude the presentation then, members, we thought it'd be helpful just to run through some of the expectations on Audit Wales and how we would like to see our reports taken forward when they are received by the authority. And importantly, we see the Audit Committee as being the main recipient of the findings and then taking forward what we put in our reports to satisfy themselves and ensure that they are being acted upon. And the Audit Committee obviously has an important role. That's not to say that these reports can't be referred on to the authority as it is this morning with regards to the carbon emissions work. But for us, really, it's important for the committee itself to understand the findings, to contextualize the findings that we come forward with, and then assure itself that there will be sufficient action to take forward the recommendations that we make. And just to sort of hopefully explain how we see audit committee, or where we would like to see audit committee, we think that it has a really important role in supporting the organisation, officers directly, but also how you deliver your services to be what we call the improver, where you have sufficient rigour and oversight, but also the way that you undertake that work and the relationship you maintain with officers is very supportive and positive and not overly critical. And I think what I've seen this morning is that there's been a very healthy debate on the topics that you've had before you. It's some very challenging reports that members have responded to. So we're confident that as an organisation, you appear to have that balance in a pretty good place at this time. I did mention right at the start that we also have what we call the good practice exchange. And I thought it'd be helpful just to outline that this is a free service that Audit Wales provides to help the public sector identify opportunities for improvement by sharing both the knowledge that we draw from our audit work, but also wider good practice from across Wales and beyond. There is a series of events that are planned and run over the course of the year, mainly via online webinars, but on occasion in-person events. These are free to attend and they're open to anyone working in the public or voluntary sectors in Wales. And you can access information on our programme of work on our website. So if any member has a particular interest in a topic that is within our list of activities for the year, feel free to put yourself forward to register and come along if you can make it. Then finally, just to sort of outline who you'll be seeing in terms of the work that we undertake with you, this just lists the people. So you have Adrian Crompton, who is the Auditor General for Wales. And then we have what we call an engagement lead who has responsibility for undertaking the work with each of the bodies that we audit, and that's Derwin Owen. And then it's myself and Euros who have responsibility locally for the performance audit work that you will be receiving, and Mike and Jody who run the financial audit part of the organisation. So no doubt you'll come across this in a bit more detail going forward. Finally, you can find out more information in terms of the publications that Euros mentioned specifically on our performance audit work on our website, www.audit.wales. And we're happy to take any questions, Chair, that members may have. And I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Euros. I presume that the presentation will be made available to members as well going forward, because it hadn't been supplied prior to the meeting. Am I right in saying that?
Absolutely, we'll provide that to you.
Excellent. So over to members for any questions or comments. Diolch yn fawr. Nigel, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. It's not a question really, because well, I don't have any questions. You're a very professional organisation, and I really appreciate the excellent work that you do. But I just want to say, as chair of the audit committee, that the audit committee members, we do the best that we can. We are lay people, but we challenge when we can. And I really appreciate the fact that you've recognised that sitting in on this meeting. And again, I just want to say that the audit committee members are a great team, and it's very much appreciated as chair, the work that they do. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. Deputy Chair, Paul. You're on mute, Paul.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would also like to thank the audit team for doing their presentation. I know you and I sat before them not so long ago, and they gave us a good old grilling, and so we know what the work that they do. But yeah, it's nice to know that they're keeping their eye on us, but they're also there to support us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. I can't see any other hands being raised, so can I thank Euros and Nick once more for their presentation, which was very helpful, especially bearing in mind that we have so many new members on the authority. Very helpful indeed. So I'm sure that they will also have input on the next item on the agenda, which is the carbon emissions reduction report, which is linked to an Audit Wales report. But it's Deputy Chief, Assistant Chief Fire Officer Stuart Millington, who's going to introduce the report in terms of our response to date. Thank you, Stuart.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Bore da, pawb. As members will be aware, all public services in Wales have a requirement to be carbon neutral by 2030. And in March 2022, Audit Wales published their findings following an audit of North Wales Fire and Rescue Authority that took place between November 2021 and March 2022. And that audit sought to determine if the authority is making good progress in reducing its carbon emissions and fully contributing to Wales's public sector becoming carbon neutral by 2030. And March 2023 does seem to be some time ago now, but with general elections and the new fire authority shortly afterwards, this is the first opportunity that there's been to present this report to the full authority. It's fair to say that at the time that the audit was undertaken, public services were at different levels of progress towards the 2030 target, with some being further along than us and some being at the same level or even further behind than us. And the issue at the time, not only in our service, but in others too, was a lack of specialist expertise to advise and take agencies forward on the journey towards carbon neutrality. So in relation specifically to North Wales Fire and Rescue Service, in essence, the audit report determined that it was unlikely that the authority will meet its statutory obligations and become net carbon zero by 2030 unless there is a step change in performance. Audit Wales went on to make 5 recommendations to assist in making the necessary progress, and these can be seen in section 9 of the covering report, in that we develop an accurate carbon baseline, that we develop a specific plan for carbon reduction, that we revise the vehicle replacement programme policy and agree the authority's strategy for replacing diesel appliances and improving the charging infrastructure across the service area, that we engage and involve staff in planning for carbon emissions reduction to ensure that they take ownership of the authority's plans for improvement and are fully contributing to delivery of key actions. And finally, that we strengthen how we progress in delivering actions to reduce carbon emissions and delivery against Welsh Government targets are progressing and resulting in improvements. Since the report was published, we've been making steady progress against the recommendations. And in August 2022, we were able to appoint a climate change expert who will meet during the next agenda item. And he's been able to assist us to get back on track. We now have a far more accurate carbon baseline. A strategy is being drafted and will be brought to you for approval in due course. Proposals for the reduction of diesel in vehicles are being considered, and work to improve the vehicle charging infrastructure at our sites has made significant progress during 2022 and will continue into 2023. The new Environment and Sustainability Group, that is chaired by our new Environment and Sustainability Manager, has developed the clear terms of reference and has set improvement targets to put the authority in the best position to achieve net zero by 2030. Whilst there's still much to do, the authority is in a much better position than we were when Audit Wales visited us in November 2021. So unless Eros would like to add anything to what I've said, members are requested to note the comments or the contents of the report and to support the service as we continue to strive towards achieving net carbon zero neutrality by 2030.
Yes, dear. So it sounds as if it's a work in progress, but we're heading in the right direction. I can see some hands coming up from members, but first of all, I don't know if Eros or Nick want to say anything further.
We did have a very short presentation, but I think Stuart has adequately covered everything that we would have touched on, other than to say that in the terms of the information that we were going to present, just to assure members that this is not unique to North Wales. We did the same work in South Wales and Mid and West Wales. Indeed, we did a piece of work that covers the entire public sector in terms of how they are progressing to some of the targets set by Welsh Government. And I think our overall conclusion is that in some areas you can see real progress being made. In others, there is still a challenge out there. And I think Stuart did pick up on one of the big ones, is that, and I think this is something, you know, everyone's going to struggle with going forward, access to skilled, knowledgeable people who really understand this topic area. It's very limited and very difficult. So getting someone on board early on to help you progress your plans locally is a really positive step forward. But beyond that, I wouldn't wish to add anything, Chair, and we're happy to take any questions on our report.
Thank you, Nick. So John Brynmore first, and then Nigel. Thank you, John. Yeah.
Yeah, just to note that I saw an article this morning not quite sure what I saw it was newspaper or on Twitter on my phone that JCB have rolled out their first commercial wagon on the road using hydrogen.
Diolch, John. Nigel?
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Yeah, first of all, I want to thank Stuart and the team for the work that they're doing in these challenging times. Setting a carbon neutral date for 2030 was an extremely challenging thing for us to do, but it's something that we've also done in our, or in my, should I say, in my local authority. And the world has changed in the last 12 months, and that challenge has only become greater. I just want to say that, Stuart, I sympathise with you, and I find it extremely frustrating when I see nations, including ours, but nations throughout the world, cutting back on their carbon reduction and actually increasing it. So I know you've got a real fight on your hands, but as a member of the authority, and I'm sure I can say that the other members are right behind you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel. I've got a question for you, Stuart. We've got a scrutiny committee meeting tomorrow on Ynys Môn, and the Môn Gwynedd Public Service Board are presenting a report with the new objectives going forward. And there's 3 main objectives, and one of the objectives is to reduce carbon emissions. So that's going to be one of their priorities going forward. And obviously, the Fire and Rescue Service is a statutory member of the Public Service Board. Do you think that will help us in terms of moving forward with it being one of the objectives with the Public Service Board?
I think it certainly will, because in my experience with public service boards from previous tenures of those boards, often the links to fire and rescue service business is relatively tenuous. And having something front and centre, which is very much our priorities as well as local authorities' priorities, can only assist in sharing that good practice. Obviously, we have invested in that expertise now within our organisation, and I'm sure local authorities are doing the same thing, and sharing that knowledge between local authorities and services like ours and the police and other emergency services can only improve the situation for everybody.
Excellent, thank you. I don't see any other hands up, so can I have somebody to propose the recommendations, please? Deputy Chair Paul Cunningham, diolch yn fawr. I think John Brynmore's hand went up next, so you heard what the recommendations were. We'll note the content of the report and support the service as we continue to strive towards achieving net carbon neutrality by 2030. Will you show that you approve the report, please? Diolch yn fawr. That's unanimously passed. So we now go on to item 12, which is the biodiversity report, which is for approval, and it has already been to the executive panel, but it's going to be presented by the Environment and Climate Change Manager, Tim Christiansen. Welcome, Tim.
Bore da pawb, and thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to ACFO Millington for his kind introduction a minute ago. The report before members today is a statutory report covering the period from 2019 to 2022, prepared under our statutory obligation under the Environment Wales Act. This sets out a requirement to report on the actions that we're undertaking every 3 years in relation to biodiversity and protection of ecosystems, and to set out the plans for the subsequent 3-year period every time we report. So the actions summarised in the report primarily are the wildfire prevention work, the very proactive wildfire prevention work we undertake, an environmental action day undertaken in Dolgellau, grounds maintenance regime amended at 8 stations. This is where we have reduced the mowing frequency essentially to allow basically allow insects to breed during their season, and we've installed a Swift box at Harlech as part of the training tower replacement there. We've set out a few commitments for the 2022 to 2025 period, which is a commitment to biodiversity protection principles in the new environmental strategy, which I will be working with members on in the coming months. New builds and major refurbs are to meet BREEAM certification standards, a continuation and possible enhancement where possible of the existing amendments to the grounds maintenance regime, an end of use to C6 and C8 fluorosurfactant firefighting foams, which have a very high degree of ecotoxicity, and continued arson prevention work. So with that, I will say diolch yn fawr, and I'll hand back to the chair for any questions.
Thank you very much, Tim. And as I say, that this report has gone through the executive panel, and we don't have any concerns regarding the report. Any questions or comments from anybody? No. So can I invite somebody therefore to propose that we accept the recommendation? Thank you, Michelle, the seconder. Thank you, Rondo. Welcome, close up. So the recommendation, paragraph 3, members are asked to approve the contents of the attached biodiversity report and action plan for 2022. Please, will you indicate that you approve? Excellent, that's been passed. So going on to item 13, which is the improvement and wellbeing plan, which has also been to the executive panel previously. And Deputy Chief Fire Officer Stuart Forshaw is introducing this. Thank you, Stuart.
Diolch yn Cadeirydd. Good morning, everybody. As the Chair mentioned, this report has gone to the Executive Panel last month with the purpose of reviewing the Fire and Rescue Authority's long-term objectives that are contained in its Corporate Plan 21-24. Every March, the Fire and Rescue Plan for the following financial year, setting out its agreed improvements and wellbeing objectives and outlining the actions it proposes to take towards achieving those objectives during the year. Although the relevant legislation does not stipulate how often a public body must change its objectives, the requirement to undertake an annual review of these wellbeing objectives and to assess whether or not they are still relevant and appropriate. So over the coming months, officers will be revisiting the content of the authority's corporate plan in order to update the list of planned actions for 23-24. To this end, the authority is asked to consider whether it wishes to continue to pursue the same long-term objectives next year, and they can be reviewed in section 10 of this paper, or alternatively to suggest changes that can be written into the year's updated version of the corporate plan 21-24. So the recommendation, Chair, is that members are asked to confirm the authority's intention to continue to pursue the existing 7 long-term objectives for 23-24 and request that an updated version of the corporate plan 21-24, which will include those 23-24 planned actions, to be prepared by officers and brought to authority meeting in April. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Stuart. And it was the view of the executive panel that now wasn't the time to change the objectives with only 1 year left. They will be reviewed in due course. Any comments or questions? Nigel?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Stuart. I think it's right and proper that we do look at reviewing things going forward. So I welcome that as Chair of Audit, and I would like to move the recommendations if I could. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Chair. So will you show that you approve the recommendation, everybody? That's been unanimously passed. Diolch yn fawr. So going on to item 14, which is the Manchester Arena inquiry. And it's back over to, I think we have had a verbal, yes, we had a verbal report to the executive panel last time, but this time we've got a written report, and it's back to you, Stuart, to introduce this, please. Thank you.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Members of the authority will recall the terrorist attack that took place at the end of the Ariana Grande concert that claimed 22 lives and severely injured more than 100 others at the Manchester Arena on the 22nd of May 2017. Since then, there's been extensive scrutiny, not only with regards to the sequence of events that led to the attack, but also to the multi-agency response. Soon after the attack, the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, commissioned Lord Kerslake to complete an independent review of the preparedness for and response to the Manchester Arena attack. In March 2018, the review report that is now referred to as the Kerslake report was published, making 29 recommendations.
In North Wales, we examined our position against these recommendations and identified a number of specific activities that needed to be implemented in order to make sure that we've learned from the mistakes that were made in Manchester, and we would not be in a similar position if an attack was to take place here in North Wales. Much of this work is continuous and ongoing and requires regular refresher training to keep multi-agency emergency response skills as sharp as they can be. On the 22nd of October 2019, the Home Secretary established a public inquiry to investigate the deaths of the victims of the 2017 Manchester Arena attack, with hearings beginning on the 7th of September 2020. In June 2021, Volume 1 of the inquiry report was published. Volume 1 focused on the security for the arena and made a number of recommendations, but none of these recommendations were applicable to fire and rescue services. But on the 3rd of November this year, the second volume of the public inquiry was published, and this document focused on the emergency service response phase. Volume 2 consists of 916 pages and contains 149 recommendations, of which 21 are to be monitored. Of those 21, 4 were applicable to Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service directly, and 13 were considered to be multi-agency recommendations. Any recommendations made for specific organisations in inquiries of this type have a read across to the entire sector, and so can be considered to be relevant for all of our attention here in North Wales. There was significant confusion on the night of the attack, and the communication breakdown between emergency services was at the heart of a series of problems that developed. The report has helped to contextualise these problems and has identified a number of events that became the catalyst for the larger problems that followed. Clearly, there are some areas of similarity with the Kerslake report, and as more than 5 years have passed since the attack, North Wales Fire and Rescue Service have made progress in a number of areas to learn from the terrible events that took place on that night in Manchester. But we must never be complacent. Recent exercises that have taken place in other parts of the country have identified that similar issues and confusion continue to be prevalent today. Failures in communication and difficulties in achieving shared situational awareness between emergency services continue to be highlighted as requiring improvement. So in relation to next steps, in a similar way to how we examined the Kerslake report in 2018, we've already begun to complete the gap analysis against the 149 recommendations through our established governance committee structure. The Organisational Learning Committee that I chair has commissioned our operational learning subgroup to complete a gap analysis and to produce an action plan for implementation of any changes to policy, training or equipment in order to ensure that our staff would be able to respond professionally and safely to any terrorist or large-scale multi-agency emergency incident in North Wales. In addition to this, work has begun with partners through the local resilience forum to ensure that collectively we are as prepared as we can be. And also work has commenced from a national resilience perspective to ensure a consistent approach to terror attacks response across Wales. Both the work with the local resilience forum and with national resilience will result in an increase in both physical boots on the ground and desktop multi-agency exercises, as well as an increased profile for regular multi-agency training. And further progress reports will be brought to future fire authority meetings. So as a result, members are encouraged to, and the recommendation is for members to note the content of the report.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Deputy Chair, you've got a hand up. Is that a legacy hand? Yeah.
No, it's one that I've just put up, Chair. I would just like to thank Stuart for his presentation. It's important that we've recognised that we've got possible venues where something could happen. And might I just add, Chair, you and I spent some time in fire control. And in fire control, we've also got the police control room. So we're very fortunate in that aspect that we've got both of our communication centre and control in the same building. So if anything does arise, we've got immediate response from the police service and from our own fire authority. So, you know, I have no doubt that I move this report, that we accept it, and thank Stuart for the work that they've done.
Thank you, Paul. So let's The Deputy Chair has proposed that we accept the report and note it. Can I have a second? Thank you, Nigel. Will you show that you all agree? Diolch yn fawr. Thank you, everybody. So moving on to item number 15, which is the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor's thematic review into operational training. And once again, we did have a verbal report on this to the executive panel, but today we have a written report for the full authority. And DCFO Stuart Forshaw is going to introduce this item. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report, members, is to present an update following the recent publication by the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor for Wales into a review of training in the Fire and Rescue Service entitled Fire and Rescue Service Operational Training Thematic Review. On the 10th of October, the Deputy Minister for Social Partnership made a statement to the Senate following the publication of this review into training into the Fire and Rescue Service. And the review included an examination by the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor into a number of areas regarding operational training. And it started with the consideration of the current arrangements and future options for consideration of a strategic assessment of community risks. This is to inform capability development, which will in turn inform training needs analysis in fire and rescue services in Wales. The report then goes on to focus on the methodology adopted by the fire and rescue services in Wales, primarily for determining the allocation of time for training and exercising within fire station work routines, and also the retained duty system. The maintenance of competence of core skills for firefighters and additional skills areas are also considered, with consideration for the initial skills acquisition and then the progression from development to competence for a firefighter following them joining the fire and rescue service. The 8 core skill areas that the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor has considered in his review include breathing apparatus, casualty care, command and control, hazardous materials, pumps, ladders, knots and lines, road traffic collision training, safe working at height, and water incidents. And the balance between theoretical training and the use of micro teachers and practical training is considered, with questions asked of the Fire and Rescue Service to identify the control measure tactics and techniques delivered following operational risk assessments into our initial operational response capability across the full range of likely incident types in any given station area. This also includes up to the amount of time available for training on all of our duty systems, and in particular, as I mentioned, the retained duty system. The review also looks at the training venues and the impact of travel distances for firefighters when attending training events, with reference made to our BA training facility at Dolgellai being a considerable distance from all of our large population centres in North Wales. In this section, it concludes that the most appropriate solution to be a hub and spoke approach to combine existing facilities at our fire stations with new live fire training facilities, though the need for substantial capital investments by the Fire Authority is recognised within the report. Finally, the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor has observed that in his opinion, compartment fire behaviour training does not reflect real life fire conditions, and tactics and techniques included in compartment fire behaviour training should be reviewed and incorporated in light of international research. The report concludes with 6 recommendations, which include the areas I've discussed within this update and the report. In response to the review, all of the recommendations have now been included in an action plan that will be considered and managed through our Organisational Learning Committee, and that is chaired by Assistant Chief Fire Officer Stuart Millington. The Chief Fire Officer has also provided a detailed response to the review to the Deputy Minister, as requested, with our plans for addressing the recommendations, with a copy of our action plan included. And this was acknowledged in her oral statement to the Senate on the 22nd of November, which was entitled Fire Service Training and Capacity to Broadening of the Role, and in a letter received from her recently. So the recommendations, members, are that you note the contents of the report and note that the action plan that has been put in place to consider the recommendations of the Chief Fire and Rescue Advisor's review within reasonable timescales. Diolch yn fawr, thank you, Chair.
Diolch, Stuart. Any questions or comments for Stuart? The hands are shooting up. First of all, the Deputy Chair, then Mark, and then Nigel. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank for the report. Looking at item 16, going through the list of things, breathing apparatus, casualty brings back memories, Chair, when I was in the training department and also as a firefighter. So, you know, I recognise all these things, but also the report is showing that, you know, our training facility at Dolgellau is not the best, and hence that we need to improve our training. And to be honest, Chair, I think our retained section of the fire and rescue service is like the 7th Cavalry. I've used this this term before. When we need a pump, you know, we're lucky we get the retained, or we get a whole time station responding, or a day manning station responding, but we're very lucky. And we do need to improve our training, and we do need to give our staff, whether they're on the retained system or the whole time system, the best that we can provide. So thank you for the report, and I would move it, Chair.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, just a quick one, talking about, Chair, and thank you, Stuart. So over Christmas, I've seen at the Tweed Mill, your officers respond to a vehicle on fire, highly motivated, so obviously highly trained, so that's great. But previously, our fire officers have talked about the challenges of electric vehicles. So I'm just wondering, is that training and understanding moved on, just for information, because it is a big point, obviously, with the increase in these vehicles as well. Jock and Bow.
Yeah, so thanks, Councillor Young. Yeah, we've got a new training strategy, and that was presented within the budget discussions earlier on, where we're going to increase the amount of training that our firefighters are going to receive. So as part of the new training strategy going forward, there is a road traffic collision refresher course included in that, and included with the content of that course will be vehicle technology, and of course that does include alternative fuel vehicles, not only electric, but there are other alternative fuels out there. I think one of the members mentioned before around the use of hydrogen maybe coming online, so that is something else we need to look at, because that obviously is a significant risk to fire as well. So yeah, all of our firefighters currently receive regular training in vehicle technology, but going forward, alternative fuel technologies will also be included and focused upon.
Okay, Jock and Bow, thanks for that.
Thank you, Mark. Nigel?
An observation and then a proposal. It was interesting to hear Stuart mention that that the advisor spoke about the distance of the Dolgellau facility from the stations or you know, across North Wales, but it has been there for decades. And I found that quite an interesting comment. But I would like to propose a recommendation, Chair, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Mark. Everybody indicate that they approve. That's been passed. So that completes the agenda for part 1. We now need to move into part 2 to have the industrial action update. We want to exclude the press and the public, because this is sensitive. Can I have somebody to propose that we do that, please? Thank you, Deputy Chair. Thank you, John Brynmore. Would you indicate that you agree? Yeah. So can we confirm that the recording is now stopped, please, Lisa?
Yeah, I've stopped mine. I'm just trying to get a hold of IT to stop